Hello, everybody, and welcome to a long overdue another podcast, our first podcast of 2023 of the Caregivers Toolbox. We provide education and information about senior care topics, and this will be our best podcast yet. Today, we have a great guest, Ron Gold, who I've got to know from talking with him a little bit about well-aware care, and then I found out that him and his wife had created or founded Lean On We, which is a private home care company. And basically, I said, Ron, you can come on the podcast as long as you promise not to become a competitor and move up into the Boston market, and I'll stay up here and not come down into New York. But Ron's got a great inspirational story about some things that he's overcome. And it's always good to get the perspective of another home care industry titan and knowing where things are going so that you can be rest assured that you're getting good information. Ron, thank you so much for coming on the show and being part of this. Probably one of the best podcasts of all time, just very humbly saying.
Thanks so much for having me, Ryan. And yes, I promise not to come up to Boston.
Well, hey, listen. Even if you do, then we'll be friendly competitors without a doubt. There's only
Is
probably
that friendly competitors in home care or in baseball? I just want to know.
anything that we have to do. I mean, it all depends on who's winning, right? That's all that matters in that situation. But we've got about. I mean, I imagine you probably have like 4,000 competitors in your area. I think we've got about 1,800 to 2,000. So one more isn't going to change the circumstances whatsoever. So anyways, again, thank you for coming on. And I figure it's probably good for you to start out and just kind of let people know your background and kind of your story on Lean On We and how that was founded and how you got into senior care.
I'd be happy to do that. Everybody has a story on why they got into senior care, and I certainly have one as well. It wasn't my first career. My first career was on Wall Street. I was always interested in finance and Wall Street. And after I graduated from college, I worked at a bunch of firms, including Lehman Brothers and Barclays. And I ran an international equity desk for the two firms. And that meant that I sold U.S. stocks to Asian stocks, I'm sorry, to US-based institutions. And it meant that I got to go out to Asia frequently, generally once a quarter. And I just loved that. It was so exciting to learn something about a different part of the world that I had heard so much about and get to know it. And I did that for 25 years. And then almost 12 years ago, I was out riding my bicycle. It's something I did regularly. I would go out for 50-mile rides on weekend mornings with groups of friends. And on one particular Saturday of Thanksgiving, we were coming home when all of a sudden an out-of-control SUV comes barreling at us. The driver crossed the solid yellow line. She hit my buddy Zach, and then she hit me without braking. You have to understand that we're in a pace line and we're moving, and my eyes are locked completely on Zach's rear wheel. I can't look at anything else because if I do, I'm going to go crashing right into him. All of a sudden, I heard him scream. I look up. She's coming right at me, and I didn't know what to think because I had no time to evade. The only thing I could say to myself was, keep your head up high so it doesn't bear the brunt of that impact. And really, that was the last thing I remember. They said a helicopter quickly came to a nearby prep school and then medevaced me to the nearest trauma unit. They had radioed ahead. Trauma team was on standby, but they didn't expect me to survive. In case you're wondering, I did.
Did you? That's always a good thing.
It is a good thing. I woke weeks later from an induced coma, only to find out I was a paraplegic and I'd never walk again. And that was really the story. After 5 months, I came home to try to rebuild my life, and it's been certainly not the journey I had seen for myself back then. But we have to adapt, right?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that that obviously was a big left-hand turn or right-hand turn in the plans, and it certainly made a lot of things change, but it put a lot of things in perspective too. You know, the hitting the quotas of whatever job changes when your health goes downhill. And the old saying is, you know, a healthy man thinks it wants many things, a sick man wants only one, right? And that must have been basically what happened to you sitting in that hospital, knowing you had probably months, if not years, of rehab ahead of you.
Yeah, it's true. I had exposure to home care from watching my parents, and I was helping them with their home care. But of course, when you're the person who needs home care, it's a whole nother story. And I was not I was not doing very well with it. I was struggling and thinking about all the things I couldn't do anymore, and I had a lot of why me's. And I think I remember a particular day. It was about a year after I came home. I was doing my usual sitting around, which of course is what I do a lot of, and all of a sudden, and I was in the midst of these why me's. My wife Betsy said to me, "Why not you? Bad stuff happens to people all the time." And that was not the TLC I was really looking for. But of course, she was right. Uh, Bad stuff does happen to a lot of different people, and you're dealt a hand, and you have to play that hand as best you can. And I realized I needed to sort of change my attitude and not focus so much on what I couldn't do, not focus on so much as of being the victim, and really think of myself as a survivor and someone who could still do many things, even though certainly I became physically challenged.
Yeah, I mean that's probably the tough love only a close family member or a wife can give you. That gives you kind of the you figurative boot in the ass to say, hey, listen, this is the reality. Things have changed, and you can either make the best of it or you can kind of make the worst of it. And you decided to make the best of the situation, which is obviously the preferable thing to do, but it's easier said than done, right? That's a heavy task to wrap your head around and figure out how you're going to move forward.
You're right. I mean, you need somebody who knows you well, and Betsy knew what I needed to hear, and she knew I needed to stop uh, just feeling sorry for myself and focus on what you can change and try to approach things with a better mindset and think of things as just everyday challenges to overcome, because that's really the only way you can proceed.
And I would imagine, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but like where, and I just thinking off the top of my head, I work in an old building in Boston, in the Boston area that was probably made in 1940 or whatever, before you had handicap accessible laws and had to be it must be have been a challenge just in such an old city as the New Jersey, New York area to witness what to experience what somebody goes through when you have handicap issues and mobility issues, and realizing you're in one of the oldest cities where these buildings are grandfathered in quite a bit, and that's got to be challenging in and of itself right there and then, versus being somewhere down in Florida that's new, or California that's much newer built and probably a little bit more friendly in those circumstances.
Well, here's the story. I went to a networking event, I'd say 6 or 7 years ago, and it was a networking event for people who work in the senior community, services for the senior community. And it was hosted by a bunch of elder care attorneys, and they hosted it at a restaurant. But they got a private room upstairs without an elevator. So there I was coming, and here it was, an event geared towards elder care attorneys hosting it for people who are geared for the senior community, and here I couldn't even get to it because I didn't have an elevator. And they were really embarrassed, as well they should have been, for organizing it. And I think that's just a microcosm of what you deal with. You can either roll with it, excuse the pun, or not, but you're going to run into those situations, and you just hope they're not too prevalent, and over time things get better.
Yeah, and without a doubt, I had a neighbor growing up, and I haven't faced any challenge like you're describing, outside of my mom getting sick and passing away early. But that's kind of the circle of life. You're ideally in the best scenario you outlive your parents. But I just remember being a little kid. I don't know remember why I remember it, but she was the nicest little old church lady that lived next to me, and I was probably being a stubborn, selfish little kid and talking about something. And she said, Ryan, you're complaining, you're complaining. Now, every situation in life, nearly every situation that you experience, somebody will have it worse than you do. And if you look at it through that lens, as difficult as it is, you always be appreciative of things you can do, or the appreciative of the situation that you're in versus what somebody else could be in. So I mean, again, one of those things that's easier said than done in a lot of circumstances. But like you said, you either have to roll with it, and then I'm sure those elder law attorneys recognized that and realized that they made a mistake and apologized, and all you can really expect in that scenario is them to accommodate you the next time and learn from that mistake and recognize it. It wasn't probably done in malicious. It was just like they didn't think about it because they've never had to deal with that challenge, and out of sight, out of mind. I imagine trying to give them the benefit
Yes,
of the
you're right.
doubt.
Absolutely. That's what it was. And I recognize it for what it was. And I didn't go there to and then make them feel badly about how
Yeah,
inconsiderate it was. It was a mistake, and you move on. I 100% believe that. One of the times soon after my accident, we were going out to dinner with my family, and I saw a guy in a wheelchair coming out of the restaurant, and he nodded to me or somehow acknowledged me, and I couldn't even acknowledge him because I was just so angry about my circumstance. It had nothing to do with him per se, and I couldn't even speak to him kindly or respectfully or anything like that. And after that, I was so embarrassed and ashamed of how I had acted, and that was sort of another one of those steps along the way. And Ron, you got to get your act together, because this is no way to go through. And more importantly, my kids were growing up. They were teens when I had my accident. Now they're moving into their 20s, and I'm like, they don't need me to help them with algebra or kick the soccer ball, but they do need me to how to teach them how to handle whatever life throws at you. And if I can't be an example of how they go about doing that, what kind of father am I?
yeah. I imagine there were a lot of those big level, uh, very high level conversations and thoughts about, like, well, just what you said with your kids, and the other thing is you have a wife that's standing by you, stood by you, no pun intended, but you know what I mean, and you want to be the one that's making that even more difficult. You know what I mean? You're already in these really bad circumstances that she's going to stick through you with, and then let's add on top of that, a really cranky, grumpy, angry, defeatist human being. That's not going to make the situation any better either. And I'm sure that was something that went through your head as well. Is like, listen, you know, uh, everybody's got to handle this situation around me, and I can make it either as easy for them as possible, or I can make it as difficult for them as possible. And that must have been a decision that entered your head at some point in time, just like you were talking about with the stranger that you encountered.
It did, and over time, it kicked in. And what happened is, I have actually more than just a spinal cord. I have some sort of secondary issues, and chronic wound, and I now needed home care on an ongoing basis. And I I had helped my parents with their home care, but now this is going to be a chronic situation that's going to last for quite some time. And I realized that there aren't a lot, I guess my first reckoning, as I like to say, is that, oh, my good private health insurance from Barclays is not going to cover my home care. Like, whoa, what do you mean it's not going to cover it? Of course, that is the biggest misconception people have. They think Medicare or private health insurance is going to cover home care, and other than for a very short period of time upon discharge, it won't. And now I'm thinking, okay, I got to pay all this. I can either use a home care agency, or I can find someone on my own. Um, Home care agency, I felt like I was in a position to handle a lot more of the decisions myself. As an example, when I was discharged, a couple different times I was discharged from the hospital, I had a PICC line. So that a PICC line into it's a long thin tube that enters in your arm and comes into a vein near the heart. And what do I know? And they're teaching my wife and me how to manage that. And that's the and I had a wound I had to manage, and I was doing all those sorts of things of managing my care anyway. And I figured, well, I think I can manage the caregiver as well. How do I go about doing that? And then I realized if I hire a caregiver via word of mouth, I have no way of knowing very much about that caregiver. I can do a little bit of a reference check, sure, but a real background check, no way. And what and if the person can't make it, you're unsure what to do. Um, so that was sort of the straits we were in, trying to figure out where to go from there.
And so what did you do to rectify that? Because so many people find that themselves in that scenario where they need assistance, because I assume your wife had to go to work, kids had to go to school, they were out of the house, so it's, something had to be done. And what did you ever find a solution to that problem that satisfied it?
Well, what I decided to do is this was sort of a time when we heard a lot about these sort of marketplace companies, whether Uber had recently started, and other companies that just match you directly with provider. And I thought, well, actually my wife and I, we were bouncing ideas, and we had always talked about doing something entrepreneurial, and we said, well, why can't we have a a company where we match families looking for care with a caregiver, and we have a system that does that, and we intake all kinds of information about the caregiver, and then the caregiver tells us what's going on. We verify references and licenses, and we can shoot a video, and we can take a fingerprint, and now we can provide all this background information on the caregiver that the family would need in order to safely hire a caregiver on their own.
Sorry, I was muted. And so that ended up being not only a success for you, but ended up becoming a business that brought you into the next chapter.
Right. We felt that people needed additional options, and that's what we did. We started the company. We called it Lean On We, because we think when you need help, everyone needs a team to lean on. And we created this sort of matching algorithm to match families looking for care with caregivers. And we've been doing it for 8 years now, and we've helped thousands of families. And it's I loved my career on Wall Street, and I loved numbers, and I found everything I did very exciting. But at the same time, now I can see, of these thousands of families, we are having a direct impact on their lives in a much more visceral way than I did in my career in finance. And it's a nice change, and we're finding it very rewarding.
Yeah, I would imagine. We have a wall um, that's dedicated to just all the thank you emails and thank you cards that we've gotten, because as you know, this is a tough industry, and you can have those 5 to 10% of families that that maybe make it a struggle to go into the office sometimes. I mean, that's just the reality that, it can be difficult. And sometimes we call it the wall of fame, where it's just a reminder of the good things we're doing. Even when it's tough, we're doing good things, even though it may feel like we're, you know, pushing the stone up the hill only for it to crumble back down right when we think we're getting to the top, right? And that's but when you get those emails, when you have families call you up and thank you for everything you've done, that makes it that much rewarding. And I tell people, like, I get to help people. I get paid to help people, and that's a really good way to make a living. Not that selling securities isn't a fine way to make a living, but like you said, it doesn't have that personal experience. It's just numbers on a screen, and where you positive 0.5% or 1% today or whatever, however that whole thing works. But I imagine that, you know, with just so I understand, and you employ the caregivers as well. It's not just
No.
no, so it's just the matching and getting and letting them be able to do the background checks and understand who's going to be coming in the home.
Well, we do the background check.
Yes.
But we take a fingerprint and we send that to the FBI, and that's as much of a background check as you know that you can do. I mean, when you watch when you watch the cop shows on TV, Law and Order, they don't say, "Oh, why don't we get his social security number and check his background?" No, we want a fingerprint, and that's what you do. Uh, Our thinking is if we can do all that and bring that to the table, so a family looking to hire has the peace of mind that this person's been given as good a check and it's not really just about background. It's also about personality. Is this you do an interview or you get to know or you meet or anyhow you engage with the caregiver, you find something about them and you see if there's a right fit, because it's not just about whether the caregiver has experience dealing with Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. It's are they going to be a good fit for my mom or my dad or whatever, right? I mean, that's what it's about. And look, some people don't want to be employers. That's perfectly fine. There are things you need to consider about being an employer, how to pay and workers' comp and things like that. And we certainly tell people how to go about doing that. But for those people who are okay employing themselves, it's a great tool and a great additional option for them.
Yeah, Minute Women used to be that model until shortly after I took it over, I decided to go into the employment model. So there's definitely different ways that you can go about it, and there are families that really like doing it where they have control and they can be able to manage that person, and there are pros and cons to it without a doubt. And I imagine that um, I imagine what we say what we tell people is that we could send you over Mary Poppins, and sometimes it just doesn't work out, and then we send that person that you didn't want over to somebody else, and it's a match made in heaven. And sometimes there's no rhyme or reason for it either. Sometimes it's just you can't even pinpoint it. Who knows what happened. It wasn't anything glaring that they stole the checkbook or anything. It can be something as benign as saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, and it doesn't work out. So it is difficult in the sense that you can do all the FBI checks in the world, and you still need, like you said, that personality match to be able to, especially when somebody's going to be living in the home for 7 days a week or 8 hours a day. 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, basically is a live-in care in terms of somebody's always around when you're awake, right? So you have somebody that's always there, and if you're going to have somebody that's always in the home, you want to at least like the person and enjoy, and you may not have to enjoy them, but you have to be able to coexist with them and ideally enjoy their company and enjoy what they're bringing to the table. So it is a lot of work, and that's why I think that Uberization of private home care didn't go over too well, because you can't just pick hours, services, what do you need, send somebody over, and then somebody shows up and it didn't take off for that very reason, because it's a lot more complicated than that. I mean, I don't know if you remember that coming out and what your thoughts were, but I told people, I was like, I may sound like the typewriter salesman when the computer came around, but I don't see this thing working out the way that they see it working out, but we'll see what happens. And I ended up being right on that one. I guess the blind squirrel gets a nut every once in a while. But I mean, was that your experience when you saw these types of things coming in where it's like, this is going to be a challenge to match people and you can't just do it through an app?
Well, one thing it, you are right. We were never about on-demand care. Uh, and even, sometimes people come to us for a very short-term situation, and that's not really what we do. We're about finding a match for a longer term, or most of the time at least, and hopefully a longer term situation. Because I know some companies try to do that, like that, different schedules, and it's tough, and older people are not necessarily so flexible on how that works, and particularly if there's any kind of cognitive decline, the last thing you want is a rotation and a churn of many different people coming through the home. I mean, we pride ourselves on trying to get as much consistency as possible, because we know that's one of the biggest factors uh, for for a good relationship, and a relationship that works and is sustainable.
Yeah, and our mission, just as your mission, I imagine in the same vein, whether it's worded this way, is to help people age in place at home. And then the process in which we do that, and simply put, is something that I like that we use, is that long, stable clients attract long, stable caregivers. If you are looking to have short hours and just for a little while, and then over here, maybe this weekend we need something sporadic, you're going to have a revolving door of caregivers and you're going to be unhappy. But if you have the ability, and I understand it's a lot of money, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, millions of dollars a year over the course of a few years, so it's not pocket change. But if you have that ability, obviously, if you're able to provide long and stable hours, you're going to also attract long and stable clients. And that's where that perfect match and that win-win occurs. And our best clients have been with us for 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 years because we found them the right caregiver, and it just ran like clockwork. And the clients that aren't necessarily offering that type of schedule are the ones that are usually having the struggles and are more frustrated with the process of having caregivers in their home.
That's absolutely correct, Ryan. But you bring up another good point. Home care, regardless of how you go about finding it and structuring it, is expensive, and that's why we came to you, and that's how we got to meet you through your relationship with Well Aware Care, because we're big believers in the value of using technology to complement, supplement, whatever it is, home care that goes in the home, because we know that it is expensive, and not everyone can pay for everything that they need, and it's all about finding other ways to skin the cat, and that's why we've been so attractive to VIAR and Wellware Care.
Yeah, no, and it's a great way that we met, and certainly, um, you know, long stable clients, long stable caregivers can be 40 hours a week. It doesn't have to be 168 hours. It's just having stability there. And if you are able to do 40 hours a week, um, then there's still going to be, 16, in some cases 24 hours of the day that somebody's
Sure.
unattended for. And that's hopefully where, you're going to be able to help people out with well aware care, because, not everybody can afford 24 hours a day of care, and not everybody needs that either. So, if you're able to provide a technological service that can help eliminate the need to spend a huge amount of money for hours in which somebody maybe isn't in need of home care, that's going to be a win-win for everybody. And obviously, with your experience and your untimely need for home care services, you realized, firsthand, like how quickly this turns into kind of a tornado sometimes of difficulty and trying to figure all this out. All the while, there's medical bills racking up, and insurance isn't going to pay for any of this home care stuff, and that makes it even more challenging for families. So, I mean, I think that's great that you were able to kind of see the forest through the trees, because as we've talked offline, sometimes I'm worried that private agencies are so focused on week to week numbers, because we live on, you live on it, I live on it, we know what the hours we're billing per week are, because that's the barometer of whether we're able to break even and make money, or if we're losing money that week. This allows there to be another solution that doesn't have to necessarily cost so much money for seniors.
Ryan, how do you succinctly describe the features of IR and well-aware care?
So we explain well-aware care as a hardware integrator. We are a software dashboard that takes already existing technology and plugs it all together to provide easy to read data points and customized alerts for seniors and their families. And obviously, as we've talked about, the number one alert people want is when a fall occurs on the ground. But other alerts are when somebody's been sleeping a lot or not sleeping a lot, bathroom usage, where they're spending time in the home, how long they're in the house for, and a lot of other data points that these very smart devices can pick up on in somebody's house. So that's how we usually describe well-aware care. And so if I were doing it in kind of an, we're recorded, so it's not like you can't, but it's basically a PERS device on steroids, right? This thing is a way to really know what's going on in the home without just knowing when a fall occurs, and really having a 360 view of the home without cameras or buttons or anything like that. And what
Yeah.
we find is when people look at the dashboard, they really see kind of, oh, right, this thing really is a lot more advanced in a good way than something. And then when they find out the price of it, especially if they've looked at home care services, they're like, this thing's cheap. If somebody hasn't gotten home care or assisted living, they think, maybe somewhere between $400 and $800 in equipment, depending on how much equipment you need. And then you realize that $800 might be one day of 24-hour care. So it pays for itself pretty quickly, and that's why we're excited to have Lean On We and hopefully a lot of other agencies and home care companies across the country on board.
Exactly right.
So
I definitely agree with that.
and so just to kind of go back, your accident, when you had your accident, and obviously once you got better, you recovered enough to start thinking about the second act in the second career. You just kind of decided that, like, this was the fork in the road to leave the finance world and say, hey, we're going to take the leap of faith and go and do something entrepreneurial. That was that experience with home care what really kind of got you to say, hey, I want to get more into this really messy and complicated industry that can be make you lose your hair quite quickly sometimes.
Yeah, it was. I have to say, in retrospect, I was a bit naive on how difficult it would be and how many moving parts and issues there were. The other thing I would say is it would be different if my accident happened today, because back then, 11, 12 years ago, there was no real work from home the way there is now. And it was too much of a challenge for me to get from my home in New Jersey into Manhattan every day. I mean, they were happy to work with me within limits, for sure. So I don't blame them, but I just, I did so much travel, and how was I going to visit and see the client? So it would have been very difficult for me. Maybe I could have migrated into another job. I probably could have, but it was time to try something else. Life's about trying new experiences, and
Yeah,
I
and
totally agree with that.
I'm sure you, sorry to interrupt, but I'm sure you had good contacts there that understood the situation, and if things didn't work out, you have a solid resume that you can always go back into that industry and reach out to the people in case you decide to. But that is a very good point that I wasn't really thinking about, how 2019, 2020 and on really changed the way everybody works if you're not doing hands-on work like one-on-one care. That you know nowadays financial institutions are probably looking at it and saying, why do we have to pay for somebody to fly halfway across the country when we could just do a Zoom? And even if we get 80% of the way there, that's pretty dang good for paying $30 a month for a Zoom versus $5,000 round trip to go out to the client. And instead of going out every month, you go out every 6 months, and then all of a sudden that ROI is there. So that's a very fair point that you're making. And so, well, now one of the things we were talking about offline, but it's definitely, I think, worth talking about, is what's coming up this weekend. So I mean, going from you know one part of your life to having an accident, to figuring out those challenges, and then helping people the way that you were helped with home care, and now you're you're entering a marathon, from what you told me, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, the recovery is also about reigniting your passions. And I loved bicycling. I loved getting out there and doing that. And when I came home from the hospital, people kept asking me, "Okay, Ron, so what kind of wheelchair sport are you going to try next, or what are you going to try now?" And mostly people said, "Well, I guess you're going to try wheelchair basketball," because that's the only sport that they knew. But of course, I was a lousy able-bodied basketball player, so that really wasn't going to work very well in a wheelchair. And I was looking for a number of different sports, and nothing really worked. And I tried rowing, adaptive rowing, and that's been great. And I got out rowing, and I actually rowed in the Head of Charles last year, which was great fun. I never sort of got back into cycling or hand cycling because, well, maybe there was more emotion involved in that, because that's actually what I was doing when I was hit, and I still have the pieces of my bicycle in my garage that I look at every once in a while to sort of get me in touch with what it happened and how far I've come since then. But what happened is, last fall, after the rowing season ended, a friend of mine got in touch with me, and he said he participates in an organization called Achilles. And what they do is they work to get people with disabilities out there competing in races again. And I said, all right, well, let's give that a shot. And they make it so easy. They got the hand cycle. They own a bunch of them, and they would bring it to me every Sunday morning, because I can't lift that big hand cycle and bring it, and they would physically get me in it, because I'm lying horizontal pretty much in it. And I figured, well, they're making it so easy to me, the least I can do is put the work in, and that's what I've done. And that I've been inspired. This is the other thing I was telling you. I've been inspired by the Boston Marathon since I was a kid. It was always the sort of granddaddy of marathons, even before all the other ones became big and actually way outsized it, because it was Boston. It was the original. And then, of course, 10 years ago, the bombing. I mean, I'm watching that, and I'm only a year out from my accident at that point, and I'm blown away by what happened. And then to see over the ensuing years people with amputees and other injuries and traumatic brain injuries getting back out there and doing it, and I'm like, oh my God, can it really be 10 years? I watched a bit of that this morning, and I'm like, I'm geared up. So next week, I'm going to be in the inaugural Jersey City Marathon, and I'm very psyched.
Yeah, that will be a great that will probably be a great moment for you when you get across the finish line. And hey, listen, it's maybe reignites a passion that you end up doing more often than before. I assume, I mean, this is why I'm me, and I ask the dumb questions that hopefully others are thinking. I imagine that you had to do a lot of training for this to get back into the ability to go that long, even if you're cycling. 26 miles is still 26 miles. And you were talking about getting out on the road, and obviously understandably being hesitant about that because of what happened to you. Where did you do your training? Was it on the road again, or was it in more of a confined area where you obviously didn't have the risks that are associated with being on the road?
I haven't been on the road since.
Yeah.
I've only done it in the park, and because not only because of what happened to me, but the hand cycles are very low and they're hard to see if you're out in the open road. We have a park path system near me. It's a 6 mile path, so I've gone back and forth, uh, 4 loops, two full cycles, and that's 24. And I added a little bit, a couple circles, and I got to 26. But yeah, I've been there every week on Sunday mornings, sometimes on Saturdays. I've been able to go into Central Park in New York and go around Central Park, which was very a great experience as well. And I've got some weights at home, and I'm an athlete again, so that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's got to feel good, and it'll be great, I imagine. Are you doing it? Um, are you doing this to raise money for a certain cause as well, or is this just this time for you? Or because if so, obviously, if you send us the link, I'll post it, and we can be part of that and help out in that way as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ryan. It every year I've been participating in something called the Walk to Believe, which is a benefit to support Eric Legrand, who's a friend of mine. He was injured in a Rutgers football game, and it's really raising money for the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation to support the cure for spinal cord injuries. And they do that every June, and I've been raising money every year. And I've raised several $100,000 over the course of the 10 years since my injury. But this year, I'm not doing that, and I'm not raising money in Jersey City. But I also got into the New York Marathon in November, and I am going to raise money leading up to that.
Oh,
Again,
that's
for the
awesome.
to the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation for spinal cord injuries.
That's outstanding, and certainly we'll definitely help promote that, and I'm happy to donate, and it's for a good cause like that, without a doubt. So I mean
Thank you.
that that is like what we were talking about, putting these marathons have really become a great way to um, have people see like what challenges people go through, and when you watch whatever marathon it is, I mean, whether it's Boston, whether it's LA or New York marathons, it doesn't matter. A lot of those people are running because somebody can't, or they're running to represent fallen soldiers that they were with, or whatever good causes that they believe in. So it's always a great reminder to see the partly the struggle that people go through, but then the way that they overcome that struggle, and they get better, and they get stronger, and they get out there, and they make the best of whatever situation that life's dealt them. So I think that's a great story to be able to tell.
We all have our heartbreak hills to overcome.
Absolutely. Well, how do people reach out to you? We can wrap it up on that great story, and certainly a great note, kind of. But how do people reach out to you if they're in their area, if they're interested in learning more about you or Lean On We? I'm sure you're happy to have these conversations with people and get the word out about all the great causes that you believe in.
I am. Well, thank you very much. We have a website, leanonwe.com, leanonwe.com. You can find me on social media pretty easily. I'm active on LinkedIn and Facebook and others. And or you can always call me at 917 525 2174.
Awesome. Any final parting words for the millions of people that may listen to this? Probably not. Hundreds of people that will listen to this.
I just want to say that I've really enjoyed the conversation, Ryan, and I just looked up at the time, and I didn't realize we had been speaking so long. So that's a great sign, and thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on, and it was a great conversation. And I definitely like having people on that help others. And this podcast gets listened to by a lot of people out throughout the country, and it's not just in Massachusetts or even the East Coast. So messages and inspiration and education and information on that can help swaths of people and a lot of people broadly is always a good thing. So I think we accomplished that today. And signing off, but thank you to all our listeners for listening to this great podcast, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks so much, Ryan.